Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm here with Ben Vasserlin, and it's going to be a Hailey Grills Ben episode today. I just, over the last 6 months, really, I've been really doing some, and I hate this term, but soul searching. I've really been trying to dig deep into why I do certain things, why I feel certain ways about some things. And I find myself having some questions, and that's why we're here today, because I'm going to grill Ben. I have some questions and most of these questions, because I wrote a list, are looking at like trying to differentiate between, would this be more Keirsey temperament, more of my NT? Like, is this something explained more by your Keirsey temperament or something more explained by Enneagram? For example, just one out of my 20 questions here, something I want to delve into is for example, the NT on average yearning for achievement, right? Why? And we could just start with this. That's fine. I don't really care what order we go in. But how could we say, and I understand there's so many things that play a factor in someone's personality, which we're going to talk about that too. But for example, the NT yearning for achievement, how can we say, oh, that's because they're an NT, or, oh no, they might be an E3? How do we know? Or for example, let me read through this. How would we be able to say, okay, well, an INTJ with strong FI, for example, and they are really principled, but also we know that their FI can be screwed up. But let's just say someone like me who has very strong FI, who doesn't want to screw people over, very principled in that it's because of which I'm going to get into that later. But how can we say, oh, that's because she has strong FI and not because, oh, she's an E1? Where's the line drawn between she's that way because of it? I'm sure I want to flesh these things out between
Yeah.
I have so much trouble with this.
This is I get on Jonathan's case recently about this, in that this is what I say about the Enneagram people. It's like when they are, say, writing a description of a type, they think, but it's like there's certain correlations between certain types, between certain Jungian types and one of the ways I differentiate. So, for example, when they write about, say, traits of the 8, and so it's like, no, a better example might be the 5. The 5 would be a better example. So, if we go from first principles of the 5, I would say that with Enneagram, the way we should do it, just to differentiate it from, so it's like if we take two completely different approaches, we won't get confused as to what we should put in each one. And so what I mean by that is, if we go with the 5 and we say the core need is mastery, because I've read that somewhere, and we don't say it's knowledge, we say mastery. That opens it up. So, for example, you can have people who obsessively study their craft to have mastery over their craft. So for example, you could have the person who studies music, but they're not academic, or someone, or another kind of something where someone would study something, but it's not qualified as academic. Because when people think of the 5, they think of the person who's like reading a load of books and a lot of abstract knowledge. But what about where it's mastery? What about where it's know-how? So it's like, because this is when people think of the 5, they think of someone like me, or they think of like an NT. They think of an INTJ or an INTP. But what I'm thinking is, well, if you've got, say, what is if you've got an ESFP that is obsessed by being the best actor or actress that they can be, and they want mastery in that area, then it's like, well, if we look at it like that, why can't an ESFP be a 5? Because because when we look at the 5 traits, because when the Enneagram people are looking at the 5, they start off with, a desire for knowledge. But when they look at the people that they type as 5s, those people are also something else. They're also INTJs and INTPs. And so when they write down the traits of the 5, what they're writing down are the traits of people who are Enneagram 5 fixated, and those people have a Jungian type. And if they're INTP and INTJ, then you're going to end up writing things down under 5 that are from that NT thing. So, for instance, you might have the stuff about theoretical oriented. Well, a search for knowledge doesn't mean that you, by necessity, have to be theoretical. You could have someone who's obsessed by practical know-how. I believe you could have an ISTP 5. They don't have to be theoretical. I think you could have an ISTP 5. I think John Grinder, co-founder of NLP, ISTP, he's like very theoretical. So it's like, you know, he was like an assistant professor in linguistics, and he did all the linguistic stuff in NLP. And it's like, he's not abstract. He could be a 5. I think you can have a concrete person who is obsessed by, again, if we actually say that, because it's like we make assumptions in Enneagram like knowledge. We assume that means book knowledge. But there's lots of different kinds of knowledge, isn't there? It's like, you know what I mean? Like, if you widen it out, you change our image of what a 5 is, but we assume it means, you know what I mean? We assume it's like the kind of knowledge that me and you be interested in, abstract kind of knowledge and theories. And it might be like, it's almost like our knowledge that we go for is something that enables us to get something with that knowledge, whereas maybe a more concrete person would learn something that is know-how. And that it's not something that enables us to do something else, but it's directly that thing to be able to learn how to do. So, for example, you know what I mean? Because, like, I think NTs are a bit more strategic because we're a bit more remote. They'll learn this thing because with this thing, I'll be able to do this next thing, be able to apply the knowledge. Whereas, so for example, you learn more about biology so that you can learn more about hypertrophic pathways in order to do this. And it's like, whereas a concrete person might learn the direct how-to of something that enables them to. So an ISTP might learn directly how to computer program. And so that might be more know-how, but it's still knowledge. And if you've got an ISTP, yeah, I can imagine you've got an ISTP who's obsessed by becoming a fantastic computer programmer, right?
So
why can't they be a 5?
Yeah.
I think they should be allowed in that category.
So now, like, okay.
Anyone who's obsessed by mastery. Anyone who's obsessed by mastery.
But then I would ask, what are their motivations? Like, well, for example, how would we know that a certain person is an E5 if, for everything you just said, say they're a really extroverted type, but they're obsessed with mastery, maybe obsessed with their acting, right? But they're very much doing, they're learning by doing and the know-how. But then what if we, like, is there more than that to the 5? Is it just mastery? Is there any other?
That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what makes it so hard.
That we don't know, because that's why I talk about approaches, because it's like the only way to really do it, the problem is we're lucky that we know somebody like Jonathan because he knows Jungian type and Enneagram. And the problem is with the Enneagram authors, right? First of all, they differ from each other, right? And they complain about, they'll say, oh, this bit of this type was put into that type. Well, how did that happen? Right? Because a lot of it is being made up. Now, it's great if you're writing characters like me. Like, a lot of this is fictional with these. That's why you've got to go. I think you have to go. I don't think. No, I like to be empirical with Keirsey, but with Enneagram, it's like well, if you're going to look at these people, you better look at every single Jungian type that has that fixation and make sure that they all have those as common traits. It's like, and things that overlap, like NF, will overlap with Enneagram 4.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Any NF is going to have some 4 traits, just through the very nature of being an NF. Like their identity is going to be important to them. Even if they're an FE Dom, even if ENFJ, they're still going to care about. And just like with Guardians are going to have 4 very low down. A Guardian is very unlikely to have a 4 fix, Enneagram wise. Just because
that's interesting.
Just because the 2, like for ISFJ, they're focused on other people. 4 to go over the 2 is unlikely. The 2,
and for the ISFJ, they're very much like community, not individual.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and it's about, and for the STJs, there'd be more 3 than 4. So they'd probably be, STJs would probably be more like, if you were to rank that center, it'd probably be like 4 2, 4 2, shoot myself. 3 2, then 4. And then for the SFJs, 2 3, then 4. Like 4, a 4 fix with SJ. Because like the Guardians want to be normal. It's like they want to, because they want to belong. Whereas part of the 4 doesn't want to belong. Part of the 4 actually wants to be exceptional. And actually, I think part of the 4, when they get unhealthy, is like, if they like feel alienated, part of them think, oh, good, I'm alienated. I'm different
Yeah.
from all those people.
Yeah, see, so this is something I struggled with my, I don't know if I can say this word, Tourette type on this. Yeah, but okay. Trying to figure that out, which I'm still on the fence about.
I'll just say, just for the folks out there.
Very.
Wait a minute. I'll just say for the folks out there, Tri-Type is trademarked Catherine Farver. And you go to her website, catherinefarver.com, for more information. However, what I will say is that Trifix, if you look up the trademark of that, various companies have Trifix. It's not copyrighted to any Enneagram person because it's like lots of like engineering companies will have like Trifix. And so we can use the term Trifix. It's not copyrighted or trademarked by the Eureka Institute or anything. So Trifix can be used. And the reason I use Trifix instead of Tri-Type is not as a dig against Catherine. It's just because the way I personally think that we should look at Enneagram in terms of fixation rather than type. Because even today, I was looking at the Enneagram Type 9. And I should call it the Fixation 9. Because there's going to be a tendency of people to want to fit the type description. But when the type description at its root fundamentally is about a fixation, you're encouraging people to become more fixated by being more like the fixation in order to fit in. Because there are certain people that want to fit in with the type and be like the type because they see the type description of, this is who I am, this is what I should be like. This is like, it's like a role model. A lot of people see that in, like the people who pretend to be, it's not like, they pretend like to be the idealized version of the type. And maybe if you've got someone who's a 4 and they read about the 4, imagine if, because they can get pretty unhealthy, the types, and it's like, and they might hear people say, oh, you're not a real 3 unless you do this. But because it's a fixation. They're all fundamentally unhealthy because when you write a character with just one Enneagram motivation, it's like, this is a real monocausalic. Like, I heard that word, I thought that is a great INTP word, monocausalic. But they seem like they've just got one obsession. And so I think it's useful to see Enneagram as fixations. And also, it's also Tom Condon as well. Tom Condon, his approach to Enneagram I think is my favorite because he comes at it from an NLP point of view. Andy's a 6. I think he's probably like ISFP or ISTP. And like, he won't call them Enneagram types. He calls them Enneagram styles. Right. And it's like, I will call them fixations because also the Enneagram is like, it's quite specific. It can get in. So like with the 2, it's like there's an overlap between the 2 and FE, but it says that the 2 will do these things in order to get love. So it's like, but the general FE, you can have FE people though, they're not doing things. They're not like helping someone in order to trap the other person into dependency. There's FE people who just like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we see it through that narrow lens of, so Enneagram can get very narrow. So the benefit of tri-fix and tri-type is at least it says, oh no, you've got 3 of these motivations going on, and then they can sort of blend together and influence each other. So in general, what I do, the way I make sense of things is I basically go with Keirsey temperament, and nothing can contradict Keirsey temperament. But nothing can break it, but I'll allow Enneagram to bend it. I will allow Enneagram to bend. So, for example, Keirsey will have. So there's a YouTuber out there. I think I've shown you to him, called Celebok, the ISTP guy.
Terrible with names. I'm sorry.
Okay, is it Asian American ISTP? He's got some good. He's a computer programmer, and he's got like entertaining videos. I'll put it on screen for the audience. I'll just write, I can't. Oh, comments. Oh no, YouTube. Oh, it says it's a private. Oh, you're doing it as a private video, just like you're recording it as a private video. Oh, and then you make it public afterwards. Okay. Right. So yeah. So Celebok.
So yes, you'll have to
CELEBOK. So anyway, so my point is with him that. So with Keirsey, ISTP is like contender artisan, right? And this is what I mean about Enneagram bending it a little bit. But he's a 9, and the 9 is not going to be as contender. But I think with the 9, it depends on who the 9 is interacting with. So the 9 in their personal relationships is probably going to be more harmonizing because of the fear of the 9 of losing the relationship. It's just that, so when you see someone like Celebok, and it's like, an ISTP 9 is basically going to be less contender than a normal contender artisan. And so I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's possible for it to get an INTJ 9. I really don't. It's like it'd be a bit difficult. It'd be a bit hard because the 9 is so focused on other people's opinions and viewpoints, and having their opinions and viewpoints as your own. And like INTJ is like the opposite of that. It's more like,
we did a hangout with Catherine Bobber some years ago. I think this was like 5 years ago now, and we were talking about my tri-type, and she, like, after I was telling her about myself, and then she made a comment like, and at that time I didn't know much about it, but she was like, something about you might have a 9 fix. And I mean, I just know, like, understanding more about the 9, like 2 and 9, I just do not relate to at all. So I thought that's kind of funny that her talking to me gave her a 9-ish fix vibe. I mean, okay, but I thought that was very interesting. Yeah, I remember her saying that, and I was just like, like.
What she does is, what Catherine does, she does a lot of. What's good about her is that she's very empirical, and we sorely need that in Enneagram. We need the empirical observations. The problem is the Enneagram people, in my opinion, don't know whether to classify those empirical observations under. They assume it's all under Enneagram, but it might be Jungian type, or it might be something else. So, for example, you can have, and so from you, they're just looking at. She's looking at general aesthetic things, and like just typing off someone's affect. And so it's like if someone. Maybe you were in a particularly graceful mood, like the way you carried yourself, and she might think, "Oh, graceful, she's a 9." I don't know. It's like, but she is sort of going off these sort of body language, because we did a series of events we did 3 events in a row on body language of the Enneagram types, and
that really frustrates me because, okay, sometimes when I'm talking with somebody and especially it's a low energy day, I'm not going to come across as blunt, and because I do have those days, and my communication style, like maybe it was one of those days, I don't know. Yep. But I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah, she's probably she was going off the low energy,
but this is what frustrates me, because I expect her to have but this is what we're talking about, right? Someone who only reveres Enneagram, only considers Enneagram. They don't consider these other factors, these other, oh, well, maybe she, that's not considered. It's just Enneagram. And so it was my own fault for going to the wonderful forums of Reddit for information on Enneagram. But I came to find very quickly that many, if not most of them, totally have thrown every other system out. And when I tried to inquire, why Enneagram only? Why not Keirsey? Why not even what Dario Nardi is doing has some EEG studies, something that actually can back it up. Does Enneagram have any of that? Wasn't trying to be an asshole or anything, but I was just trying to be like, hey, do you have anything objective that you can show me to prove to me, or try to prove to me, that Enneagram should be held on a higher pedestal than these other systems? And they don't. It's like, I appreciate that Enneagram, everything that Enneagram is, but at the same time, it's like, why should we throw out all these other systems? Especially just for the cult of Enneagram.
And Keirsey works so well on its own terms. And I think people should understand that Keirsey is a system that is both psychology and sociology. And that he said that his intent was to work out what people can do well. And that, I have a book called, and I'm annoyed by this book, and where he accused Keirsey of being a behaviorist, right? So basically just looking at behavior. Yes, Keirsey looks at behavior, but half of Keirsey is about motivations. Artisans want this, guardians want it. It's all in there. I could show you it. They value being this. It's all there about their core needs and self-image, all motivation stuff. And it's like, I told this person, look, Linda Behrens, she teaches temperament, and she changed the name to Essential Motivator Pattern. So motivation, it's just that Keirsey has a system where he can say, where it's you can look at something from more than one point of view. So with the Keirsey temperament, and it's when all of and you know that something is more reliable when you've got a load of sources that point in the same direction. And so from a Keirsey point of view, you can say, look at a rational, an NT, and it'll say, well, the NT has these motivations. So that's from the motivation. So we can say that's the motivation plane. And we can say they have this intellect, and then we can say that the intellect is strategic building, and there are these 4 kinds of intellect, and they sort of correlate with function pairs on a social plane. So it's TE with NI will correlate with strategic planning of resources towards long-term strategic objectives, and NE and TI will correlate towards creating systems and theories, creating my own model Vaseline or something. And it's so it's almost with the Keirsey intellects, it's this is you can see the product of these functions on a sort of practical plane. It's how do we see NI and FE? And it's well, If we look at mentoring, you can see FE with NI together when guiding somebody. Or the same with, and it's so it's like Keirsey's intellects are a system of, I would say, function combinations on a social plane. Like I said, TE with NI on a social plane is organizing resources towards a long-term strategic objective. So it's like you can, on that social plane of an intelligent social action, you can see it. And so when it's like, so in Keirsey, when it's like you identify all these people that have these motivations, and then and as you said before, that previously, that, you know, rationals tend to have an interest in the STEM fields. And then when you ask them, and then they tend to have these operations, and they tend to do those things like, that's it, constructing, like constructing theories or coordinating. So I go more towards construction, you go more towards coordinating. So, and they correlate. That's that. But then Keirsey also has this other thing when it goes to then actions. Well, NTs will talk like this, and it's like, what is the sequence of their words? Deductive. What is the reference of their word? Analytic. What is the usage of their words? Factorial. And it's like, that's more, now factorial is really going to be the case for INTP, where it's like this factor, that factor, that factor. And it's what we're doing now, where we're saying the Enneagram factor, the Jungian factor, values. And I've got something else I can bring in where, so in talking about these influences on characters, on people, a number of years ago, I came up with something called, and I might have told you about this, called the Ibrukiki. Remember that?
Right. Yes.
The non-type factors.
Right.
And so when I adapted this to writing, what I did is I took one of the letters out and I put it as a different step. Events. I took that out and I moved that under backstory. And so now I call it the Ibrukek. And so it's like, so I've got a character here I'm working on called Laura. She's going to be in the this is just my checklist for it. I didn't want it to be on screen too long, you know, not in case it's too much focus. But what I've got here, so this is what I think you get for a fictional character and what you get for a person. So the way I would understand a person, first of all, I would say, and this is a different approach than typology. So there's almost like 4 stools to understanding somebody. I would say you've got your typology, so your Enneagram, your Keirsey, and your Jung. And then you've got what I would call the Vabposia. The Vabposia. And then you've got the Ibrukek. And the Vabposia is values, attitudes, beliefs, politics, opinions, evaluations, self-image, interests and hobbies, ambitions. And when you use NLP, when you know NLP, it's like you can know where certain values are coming from, and like people use certain nominalizations. Like if someone is saying a certain word and it's coming up all the while, so for instance, left-wing people will tend to use certain buzzwords. What will come up is social justice, fairness, diversity, certain words that will come up. And if these words are said with a certain weight behind them, and it's like, okay, that is a very important, that is a criterion for that person. That is a value charged word. And that is an important value to that person. And so you can build up this whole system of values for somebody. And some of those values, a lot of those values will come from the temperament, but they also come from other sources. So I've been writing about, so I recently, I'm doing the values section for Laura, and I'm writing down what are her values. And I thought about, and I said that the Vabposia was, then I changed it to Vabposia. I added the opinions and evaluations because I wanted to know, like, to really get the character, to really, 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 really understand the character in uber depth, then the character will write itself. So when you're looking at values, it's not just a case of socionics would say, from a socionics point of view, it's like the only values there are quadra values. Well, people have more values than that. In fact, there are values that you have, Hailey, that cannot be reduced to Enneagram and Jungian type. And so other sources of values. So I've written down here. So I was doing Laura's ENFP, and I was writing about the values that come from any. And see, there you're going to have values towards like openness and options and novelty and possibilities and things like that. But you also, I've written down here in red, we'll also do values from temperament, Enneafics, associates, so basically her friends, religion, upbringing, political correctness, especially if you're a type that takes on board political correctness. Like if you're a 9, then political correctness is going to have an influence on you. And I've written here that INTJ is not really going to care about these external factors as much. Right. Culture. And Dario even said, he mentioned these big 3 factors that will change someone's brain just as much as type when he said culture, education, and career. And career history. And Dario has shown that someone's career history will change your brain. Like if someone's been doing a certain task for 10 years, their brain just changes and the person can tend to get really bored at it. And he gives an example of someone who becomes really good in, say, Photoshop. And they can do like, they're brilliant at Photoshop, but after about 10 years, they become completely bored and want to do something else. And so that has changed the brain. So, but the point is about values. And NLP has this thing where it's like you've got a value, which is sort of a generalized, is more general and wide ranging. And then you've got criteria or criterion, which is specific to a context. So it's like, and then I've got this other book. So this will give an example of a criterion. And this, you might like this because it teases it a bit. So what it does is this book applies Enneagram and NLP to selling. And so it mentions some criteria for things. So it's like if you're reading so these are some criteria for just someone buying a product. Price, performance, like guarantee, warranties, delivery, size, safety, user-friendly, aesthetics, lifespan, deal. Right. So it's like, what does somebody value? And so it's like, so for example, from an Enneagram point of view, if you really simplify it down to like Enneagram from the point of view of a salesperson, perfection, E1, acceptance, E2, accomplishments and looking good, E3, uniqueness, E4, knowledge, E5, security, E6, freedom and choice, E7, control, E8, peace and harmony, E9. And it's like what, and sort of, and the golden rule of selling being sell unto others the way they want to be sold to. But my general point here is about you can have at values, and so an NLP thing would be that a belief is built around a value, and so some kinds of beliefs, like a belief is a generalized, is a very STP point of view, that a belief is a generalization built around a value. Now, and the question then becomes, and it becomes a very interesting question to me, where do values come from? And it's not just that they come from the inside. Certain types, more FE types. This is why Guardians differ a hell of a lot depending on which culture they're in, because they take on the values of that culture. So you could have an ISFJ from a very sort of tough culture, and it's very harsh towards their kids because that's what's normal. But then another ISFJ in a completely different culture, like they might be like, again, because they're very much their values, a lot of the values of the guardian come from their culture. Now,
right.
but that's not necessarily, is this because it's not completely the case, because there's a certain fundamentals to the guardian temperament where it's like, if the culture is completely indisciplined and slack, you're still going to have that guardian trait of they're going to be like pissed off, right? That people are irresponsible, because there's part of that like, just do the right thing, just follow these. It's going to be part of it. Just follow the instructions and that. But so there's all these different influences on somebody, and then with the Ibukiki is individual social status. So just the influence of class. So for example, INFP. We have an image of an INFP as someone who is a little bit wimpy. But imagine an INFP from a tough background, who's from a tougher culture where they had to grow up, say a Brazilian street kid, INFP. It's going to be very like so.
Right. There's so many other factors.
Yeah. So and then there's biology. Biology is massive. Massive. You can have an ESFP ESFP who is good looking, and they fully express their personality. And they might be like the ESFP woman. I once saw a clip on something where a woman just went up to a guy and kissed him and said, "Oh, I acted on impulse." But what happens if that same ESFP wasn't happy with the way she looked? Then she wouldn't express, her personality type would not be expressed. Or it's like someone we know, Jeff, and he's talked about this on his channel, where Jeff for a lot of his life was overweight, and he spent like 2 or 3 years losing weight. The way he relates to himself and expresses himself, and the way other people see him, is different because he changed his appearance. And you've talked about this as well, haven't you? About how changing your appearance made you feel differently about yourself. So that affects. So biology, or if someone say ESTP, but they're a 5'1" man, is different from an ESTP who's 6'5". And they like fully express, they fully express themselves. Or it's like where you get all the ESTP that's like, that ESTP that's got a load of skills in sport, and they can really do, they're like going to be like the stereotype of the ESTP that's got great hand-to-eye coordination and all of this kind of stuff. But you can have ESTPs that don't have great coordination. But it's like, and how is that going to affect their self-image? And it's like Jeff has talked about the artisans. You can have artisans that will have an art, but they don't show it to anyone because they themselves do not think that they are good enough.
Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of.
Yep. So just
it's great. It's great. I'm just.
So when you interview someone, so I have some experience now. I type in people, and what I want to do is I want to get all this stuff separated out, and I want to know about the biography of the person, the non-type factors. For example, INTP female that grows up and her family like gets her to go outdoors and like becomes an outdoors woman and like can be very good at just like working with her hands outdoors. Maybe she grew up on a farm. Maybe she grew up poor and she never went to university. Maybe she learns these other skills. That's going to be very different. And then you're going to have and became a young mother. There you've got life developing that INTP, and you're going to look at her and you're going to think she's pretty good SI and SE. Yeah, but she had to. She hasn't developed it.
Right. Yeah, totally. So now my question to you, like as an example.
Yes, let's get specific.
Well, yes, because I really like the specifics, and I kind of like the extremes. So someone with like, okay, how often do you find that these factors, like someone who has a ton of FI is also going to be in E4, have E4 in the tri-type? Or for another example, an NT Keirsey type will have E3. Like my problem is
I will say
it's
that
very difficult to type someone without knowing all of, like, delving into them deeply.
yeah. Some
And
people, well, it depends if it contradicts it. Some people you can type them, it's like boom, boom, you just got them straight
yes,
away. And it's
well,
like, there
but you
are
have
people
to
like that.
know.
It's like, yeah, there are people because
You have to know what you're doing, like you, for example.
Thank you. But it's like what I've known is usually when it's not the case, it's one of the things to look for. One of the things I look for is when you're a bit unsure and you can't really type someone that well. There's usually a couple of things. First thing I think is there an unusual Enneagram Jungian type combination going on, such as there was someone on my channel, Elena V, INTJ, but a 6. An INTJ, but a 6. And so she thought she was like INFJ. Because with that 6, she's more in touch with her feelings. Because the 6 is more insecure and there's more worrying going on. And so whereas the 5 is staying more in their head and pushing their feelings away. That's how we're taught about the 5. Now, whether that's actually a trait of the 5 or of the people that they've been modeled on.
You're right. And that's another question. I mean, about the 5, other than mastery and the whole like attaining knowledge, which, okay, but this element of the 5 being withdrawn and withdrawing into themselves. And I'm like, okay, well, how does someone like me who like, and this is where the functions helped me so much early on because I knew like fucking, and I knew, but then getting into Enneagram, it's like, okay, well, the 5 is a very withdrawn type. Like, yes, okay, the mastery, I relate to all this too. Yeah, well, that's why. It's like, why?
That's my point is like, it depends because we've got to be honest about this. The people who write in this system are not gods. And like when we've looked at, and I've asked Jonathan about this, about Naranjo, and it's like, now the original guy who was doing Enneagram, Oscar Ichazo, he was like, I mean, he came up with the term trifix. So it's like he didn't see it as a system of personality types. He saw it as fixations.
Mm-hmm.
And Naranjo, he's the one that, right, and I can give an example that Naranjo is not God because when his description of the 8 is only ESTP, I can prove it. So, for example, this book channels Naranjo a lot and actually credits him a lot, so it's not plagiarism. But what I can say is he got the traits of the 8. This is an example of how the Enneagram authors. So if you're going off this book, I'm going to give you the traits of the 8. So these traits, these basically Naranjo's traits of the 8. Right. Insensitivity. Okay, that's fair enough. That doesn't exclude like ESTP, ENTJ, and ESTJ. The 3 types I see as like can be 8 fixated. That doesn't exclude any of those. All 3 of those can be insensitive. Autonomy. Okay. Here's the 3rd one. Sensory motor dominance. That leans towards ESTP. And then what else we got? There's another one as well. Punitiveness, revenge. Okay, fair enough. Then it's got another trait, rebelliousness. That's an ESTP trait. An ESTJ, you wouldn't say about an ESTJ, sensory motor dominance, rebelliousness. And then there's things here like, here, 8s engage in action more than thinking and feeling. Really? An ENTJ 8 is not going to do that. They're irrational, going to think ahead. They're strategic.
Mm-hmm.
But that super fits ESTP.
And so this is, a lot of people are probably going to get pissed off me saying this. I don't fucking care. And it makes me so angry. Unless you're like, Ben, I'm not bragging on you. It's the fucking truth. I mean, we can all learn more. Yes. But you are very well-rounded in your, like in all of these different systems. And I feel like unless you are like this, you will be severely incompetent and not able to truly type someone, because if you're like going off of just what, like Naranjo, for example, when I was on the Enneagram Reddit sub, people looked at me and said, oh, E3. And I'm like, motherfuck, like, yeah, just fucking, like, oh my gosh, it makes me so angry. And hey, maybe so, but I'm like, okay, what about all of these other factors? What about, I mean, I feel that these people, and I don't know if it's ego. I don't know really what it is. It's just that they want to cling on to just this one system, this one thing, and they just don't, they don't want to intake any other information. And I've seen that, like, Keirsey is, like, for example, the NT was just dead ringer. And since I've learned about the temperament types, it's like I see this everywhere now, like SJs, SPs, like all these different elements. Like I see the value in this, and I'm like, yeah. And so I'm which I eventually deleted. Like I got out of the Reddit thing. I'm like, it's my own fault for going there and expecting anyone to give me any semblance of intelligence. I'm sorry, but it's frustrating though, because I like, is it ego? What is going on? Like, but at the same time, something else I struggle with is imposter syndrome, and feeling like I don't. And a lot of it too, it's not just imposter syndrome. It's the fact that a lot of these systems aren't backed up by anything, like anything absolutely concrete. And while I've seen many of these things play out in people's personalities and temperaments, like I've actually seen them, I still have this little voice in the back of my mind, like, is that really correct? How do you know? Like, how do you know?
Like, I do that with functions, where this is where I'm like, ultimately, if you like really nailed me to the past, like nail me to the mast, got a gun to my head, Ben, which system do you believe in the most? And I would say Keirsey. But also,
okay,
it's also about, it's like, which bits, you know this from, like, you read, like, in your research, it's reports that back up other reports and different angles that come to the same conclusion, or complementary conclusions from different angles. And it's like when you talk about the different factors in hypertrophy. What is it like? Continuous tension and metabolic stress, and the other one, muscle damage. And it's like those three things that and you talk about that you shouldn't think about those in isolation. They should like combine them. And so, but with Keirsey, what I would say is, it's like Socionics. Yeah, Socionics has got something wrong with the IS types, right? The problem is, it would take me a long time to actually lay all the information out and all of the patterns, where I can say something like this: you Socionics people have got LSI and SLI the wrong way around, because why is it, you people, that all these MBTI ISTJs have got this reduced affect display, the same as INTJ? That's because they are FE polar. The ISTJs have got FE as their weakest function. But here's the problem: Socionics would classify them as LSI, which is basically TISE. But no, it doesn't match. And also, what else do we get from MBTI? If you ask the ENFPs, right, in like Carol Linden said that she was at a convention, they asked the audience how many ENFPs were married to ISTJs, and a lot of them were. And Socionics would have us believe that the MBTI ISTJ is the Socionics LSI, when that means they're married to their conflictor. No, I've seen examples of ENFPs with ISTJs. So it's the Socionics, and they have mixed it up where they got it the wrong way around, because Socionics has not observed what Jung got exactly right. It's like there's a real principle I've taken from Jung. What he nailed was that extroverting is empirical and introverting is subjective. Because when you go through the definitions of like thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting, and it's like it lines up with the. So it's like if you say empirical feeling, then we can say, well, and then that relates to the polar functions as well. So, for instance, with you, you are expressive only in certain situations. Whereas, say, if you look at ESFJ, from their affect display, from their facial expressions, and from their voice, you can see there's a greater expressivity there in that. So that lines up. And so when we look at ISTJ and INTJ, they have reduced affect display. So Socialist is right about that part of FE. But it's like everything that's empirical, where the FE dom is towards like what are the values of the society, the cultural norms, the manners, all of those things that they're attentive to, and then everything that is subjective, and that also models our view of reality. That so, for example, the way we understand each other, we understand mostly of what each other is saying, and just with anybody, because so there is that empirical aspect, but there is that subjective aspect as well, and this just complements the fact that I've read books on audience theory about how different audiences decode the same text, or you can have two people watch the same thing and get something completely different out of it, and then but you'll know that, and then you'll see these reviews of the same thing, and if you read enough reviews of something, you can say, okay, there's common themes here, where you can say, like, we could say this bit is like empirical. I don't like using the word objective, because to me objective means really, 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 really true. Like, all people think it means you must be objective, like emotionless, or people think it means, so it's got three definitions. But I mean empirical in that you can, so for instance, you can see a score out there for this movie has got this average on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, and then and so there's an empirical factor and a subjective factor, or the things that they have all in common. Like, if there's a large majority of people think that a certain sitcom is funny, that's empirical. And then if you go, you know what I mean? Like, so that is part of reality, empirical and subjective. And it explains why. And so Jung's model explains why, or matches why, humans have this incomplete understanding of the world. That there's the empirical factor, so that we can roughly understand each other, and then the subjective factor that matches the fact that why there are differences between people in their understanding. It's like, and the INTP is what they tend to do. What does the INTP tend to do? They'll read a book and they'll disagree with what they read the book, and they'll rewrite it to cook with their own theory. Vanderhoek, he reads psychological types, he doesn't agree with it. And he comes up with his own theory, and he says, I don't think sensation is the right word, I'm changing it to instinct. And it's like, and then Keirsey does the same thing. He reads it and he comes up with his own system. And it's like, they'll always add their own spin to it. So it's like, that's because the thinking of the INTP is subjective. Now, what we rely on, though, is internal consistency. And I'll now get back on topic by saying that I look for consistency between these systems. So with the Keirsey temperaments, Keirsey will say there's a lot of things, and you know this from science, a theory should make falsifiable claims so it can be testable. When you've got these theories like objective personality, which I do not like, where it has all of these variables, which means that you can never falsify it, because you say, oh, doesn't that falsify it? Oh, no, we've got this sub variable that cancels that out. Well, if that's like saying, oh, here's the abstract type that's concrete, or here's the concrete type. It's like, you can't use it as a dichotomy. Oh, here's the introvert that's extroverted. It cancels it out. Whereas with Keirsey, I will bend it with Enneagram, but you can still get to it. So, for example, if you have somebody who's, and I sort of picked this up from Jonathan, and Jonathan is the one to go to on my channel to learn about him, because he knows about Jungian type as well. He's probably the most knowledgeable Enneagram person who knows in terms of, for a start, he trained for years now with Kathleen Farber, and he knows about Jungian type. The other people with Enneagram, they don't know Jungian type. And so I got on. What was I saying about
It
Jonathan?
seems a lot of them don't know anything else.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, part
They
of it
just
is
stick to Enneagram.
yeah. And so the Keirsey people. So what was I going to say about Jonathan? Yeah, matches. Yes. So with the Keirsey, you can say, and if you look for the connections between the systems, so in Keirsey's profile of INTJ, it will say that they don't show much emotion. And it goes, oh, that matches Socionics, ILI when it talks about reduced affect display for the FE polar. Okay, that matches. When he writes about all the NI and developing, and the INTJ they're good at contingency planning where you have to think ahead about what can go wrong, and then if this goes wrong, you do that, and they go, oh, that matches NI with TE and Socionics, and it's like, okay, that matches. It's like you've got two independent sources matching each other, and then this is the real feather in the cap of Keirsey temperament is that Dario Nardi's types are the Keirsey types, because he was taught by Linda Behrens, and Linda Behrens was taught by Keirsey. She used to call her business the Temperament Research Institute. She teaches temperament. And so Dario's EEG research, and I asked him, how do you type the people? And one of the ways he types people before he EEGs them, or when he did his research with the students, temperament and interaction styles, which came from Linda Behrens, but Linda Behrens got that from Keirsey. So in other words, the science, the actual science that we have in terms of EEG is backing up the Keirsey types. And so I call them the KBN types, Keirsey, Behrens, Nardi. And it's like that, because we're all part of the same tree. And Wojtek once said about Keirsey temperament, it says it's his favorite system because he can't find anything wrong with it. And he said there's lots of good stuff in Socionics, but there's stuff in Socionics that's just wrong. Like it's
really
very ambitious. Socionics is incredibly ambitious and over ambitious. And the Russian Academy of Sciences has listed it as a pseudoscience, but that's people going too far. And I also think, and so I think you should look up from an Enneagram point of view. If you want to look at someone who I like the way Tom Condon talks about it, because I think he's a concrete type. Like I said, ISFP, ISTP, and he is a bit skeptical about it. And so, yeah, so like I said, if you've got someone, so if you've got, from a Keirsey point of view, if you've got somebody and it's like, okay, this is this person's motivations. They talk like a rational, deductive, factorial, analytic. So factorial in terms of getting all the factors in, right? And they've got this interaction style, right? So you've got all those things within that are consistent within Keirsey temperament itself. That Keirsey temperament is not just behavior. That it's like, it's this motivation, and they tend to be utilitarian, and they tend to be abstract like this. And they tend to do these kind of roles. And then you can say that those Keirsey roles actually then correlate to these function pairs. And so it's consistent with Jung. And it's like, and then the only thing that's inconsistent with that is a quarter of Socionics when it talks about the sensory introverts. But if you read a profile of an intuitive in Socionics, it's like this is describing the same kind of person that this Keirsey profile is talking about. And so you're looking for the similarities. It's like you when you do your research for the hypertrophy, you're looking for the commonalities between the research to see if a report is an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like with Enneagram, now Catherine has tried to be empirical, but the problem, but as I said before, it's like those traits that she's measuring, those empirical traits, it's like it might be empirical, but it might not be. How do you know it's relevant? But so you have to do, but she does do a heck of a lot of, like, so the empirical, what she does is she farms data. So she has a free test for Enneagram. I'm not saying this is unethical because like she tells people what she's doing. And so they do the test, and before they even start the test, they write down 5 words that describe you. And so she has all of this data of what all of these people who get certain Enneagram results, their self-image words. So that's a great amount of data where if you've got all of these people who score 5 and they've got all of their words, so that's good, like empirical stuff. It's just the issue is certain Enneagram. That was it. I remember now the issue. So we had somebody in the Keirsey temperament who thought she was a guardian, but she had some artisan traits. And I thought, oh, there's something going on in here. I'll bring Jonathan in. And we did a tri-type, tri-fix video with her. And what it was, and I'd noticed this before, ISFP 6. And something that Jonathan came to, and it's like, if someone's an ISFJ 6, they're going to be extra ISFJ. But when you're an ISFP 6, you are going to see him in between ISFJ and ISFP, because the 6 is, it's quite conservative. So you will appear half an hour. It's just like if you're an INTP and a 5, you'll seem really INTP. If you're an ESTP and an 8, you'll seem really ESTP. If you're INFP and a 4, you're going to be really INFP. But if you're like INFP and a 9, which I used to think was impossible until I did a video with Leon, but you could get some certain combinations will throw you off. Like, again, Elena, INTJ 6. An INTJ 6 will seem more feely.
My sister, I cannot Keirsey type her.
Right.
It's SJ or SP. Definitely not NF, not NT, but she has both sometimes. She can be very sporadic, but she's very caught up with what I should be doing because society tells me this is right. And she's very like, it's so hard for me to read her. So
yeah, that's one of the things that you'll get from you use a keyword there. Keyword guardians will use should. It's like it's the NLP calls it modal operators, or I got it written down on this piece of paper. It's the modals. It's like ability, possibility, obligation, permission, and it's like maybe the MPs are going. The words they'll use more like we could do this, we could do that, sort of like possibilities. But the guardians are about the shoulds. So if someone's in between artisan and guardian, they're probably a 6. If they're in between artisan and guardian, they're probably an artisan 6, because if they're a guardian 6, they would be extra. And so you might actually and trying to go the other way. So for example, you could get an ESFJ with a 7 fix, but for them it's about enjoyment. For them it's about with other people, because then it's like, oh, I'm out partying with my friends, and when they're happy, I'm happy. Because we had that with Dr. Julia on the channel where she had a 7 fix, and that surprised Jonathan, because from Jonathan's point of view, nearly every guardian has got a 6 fix, but she was just unusual in being, but like I said, outlier type. But then again, a hell of a lot of guardians are in medicine. It's just that with her particular upbringing, so I think that's possible. You can get an ESFJ 7, no, not core 7, second 7. And those fixes, and something else, like if you've got an ESTJ 8, they might be a little bit more rebellious than, say, an Enneagram 3 ESTJ. The Enneagram 3 ESTJ will be more shoulds, but the Enneagram 8 ESTJ is going to be a bit more independent. So maybe they'll look a little bit more like ESTP. Especially if, say you've got an ESTJ 8 who's from a tough South American country that's poor and with a tough upbringing, and what is normal for them, then you could have like the ESTJ 8 gang leader. And it's like, you'd have to like, what is normal to like, to compare, to like find if he's a guardian or a artisan. It's just that if someone were an ESTP in that situation, they would be extra. So you frequently look for that comparison. Like if someone's in between, so it's like this. If someone's in between, you got to think, okay, there's got to be like an Enneagram that usually has contradictory traits. Like I said, if you've got a type that where it's like, say, here's an example, an ESFP that's a 6 won't be as artisan-y as, say, an ESFP who's a 7, because there's going to be part of that. And so we typed somebody on the channel, Zadina, is an ESFP 6, but she was also counterphobic 6. So she did things like playing American football. And it's like, so you got to sort of watch for that. So yeah, so look for Enneagram. Usually, I think if someone's in between, look for an odd combination of Enneagram and Jungian type, or it might be something from backstory, like I mentioned before, like say with an INTP who's like, because of their upbringing, they did a lot of outdoor stuff and they did a lot of SE stuff, and they maybe they became a mother at a young age, and the sort of the functions that would draw on. Because I've seen an ESFP, like frequently you'll see with ESFP, they can mature almost overnight just by being a parent. From the stereotype of an ESFP. So you could have an ESFP that, say they became a parent at 19, and then you then compare a 26-year-old ESFP that's been a parent since 19 to a 26-year-old ESFP that's not a parent. Like Jeff has talked about this, where he said that, and he was a single father. The mother was ENFP, and he said he was, anyway, I don't know if I should say that. But anyway, the point is, I have to be careful about what's been said in public and private. Anyway, the point is, though, that with him, an ESFP single father at a young age had to think about logistical things that his temperament would not normally think about, but he had to think about those things, those self-preservation things, because he was thinking about the safety and welfare of his son. So the role that someone's forced in, and so it's like, and gender role socialization plays a part in this. So for instance, like the role of mother very much fits ISFJ. The ISFJ female very much fits into that role. ENTJ female doesn't, and INTP doesn't. But motherhood very much suits, as they're naturally predisposed to that role. ISFJ. So yeah, it's looking for these. So usually it's like, oh, it's this person's like. I usually think there's an Enneagram factor. There's something weird, like so. It's like a 9 that can make someone who's. So, for example, a 9 can. Just like what I mentioned before with ISTP. An ISTP 9 is not going to be as contender as your normal ISTP. And you might look at them and you might, and if you're typing with functions, you might say, this person doesn't seem to have like the cut and thrust or the assertion, especially if you're coming from like a socionics point of view, when you sort of associate SE with sort of like force and like the assertive subfunction of SE. And so you got to look for. So I would think, so in my system, it's like someone like Solobok, he's ISTP, he's 9. I would think, okay, I would look for the harmonizing kind of SE, the adaptability. So if you see this ISTP 9, it's like if you see him adapting to other people's needs and adapting in the moment, then you can say, this person, they're showing the adaptability of the artisan. And this is where it gets tricky. So, for example, an ISTP 9 is going to be somewhat accommodator, and that the ISFP is called the accommodator artisan. And so ISFP is naturally accommodator. So then you got to look for like little distinctions to like see how accommodating they are, and then look at other functions as well. Whereas like how much TI is being used, how much FI is being used. and not just look at interact. So this is why I'm prepared to bend a little bit on Keirsey in terms of the combinations, changing things. And also it's like, if someone is, say, but again, there's other things that you can use in Keirsey to check. So for example, an ISFP sexual 4 could seem like an NF based on their motivations, because they're very like someone like Prince, the musician, 4. And I know someone who thinks he was ISFP, and she was like a big fan of Prince. And it's like, okay, can we use something? We can use something from Keirsey to check that. Which is speech. What is the speech like of this 4? Is it abstract or is it concrete? Are they talking about identity, but in like a pretty concrete way? And then we can also compare functions as well, like to like see if there's anything going on, like see if they like, because the ISFP sexual 4 might be mistaken for an INFP, and that person might think they're an INFP because they'll read the temperament of the NF, and it's like, oh, identity. Oh yeah, identity is really important to me. So it's like that, because the Baron's description of the NF, it sounds very E4-ish, and so now the Keirsey is more, because like you just got one block, but Keirsey is a little bit more nuanced, but like it's a bigger book, 300 pages versus like a small book versus a 50-page book. So you got to look for those little distinctions, and so there are. So I would say if you use all 3, temperament, Keirsey temperament, functions, and Enneagram, and try and get a match with those, and then there can be these other outside factors as well. Like, what was the type of their parents? What influence was the parents that they had on them? I mean, so for example, someone on my channel, Kristen, ESTJ. Now, I think she's a creative subtype, but she still has these ESTJ tendencies. And so, for instance, she took a socialites theory and applied it to education. And it's like, you would not think that of an ESTJ, but she's creative in applying a bit of theory to her teacher. But the thing is about Kristen, one of her parents is INTJ and the other one is ESFP, and they're always trying to get her to think for herself. So it's like, it's when you sort of dig deeper and you get the motivations, and she talks about on the inside that she is wanting to tell people what to do. And that's like her first instinct, is to tell people what to do, to be that supervisor. And it's to get these little nuances. And when someone gives, and it's like, you got to do the follow-up questions. So it's like, if someone says they're interested in philosophy, which bit of philosophy are you interested in and why? And then you can see if it's more NF-ish or more NT-ish. So details.
Yeah, all very, very interesting. So I'm going to bring you back now. So yes, with all of this in mind, that there are many things to consider.
I want you to get some.
I'm going to give myself as an example.
Yes.
Well, no, it's fine. I mean, we're just kind of discussing what's coming up. But so I'm going to use myself as an example. And this is something I'm currently trying to hash out with my tri-type. Yeah. And that's like the E3, E4 thing as a fix, because it's hard, because first of all, we have all these kind of differing definitions of what they are. So that is that is difficult in and of itself. But for example, if I wanted to say, well, I really relate to the 4, but at the same time, my type has strong FI, I'm like, I very much relate to the sense of, I want to be different. Like, I want to be different at the expense of people even thinking I'm weird. But I'm like, how can I say, oh, that's an E4 fix, and not just because I have strong FI and I'm rooted in, like, that's my identity. Like, I want to be different, but like, I value, like, it's hard, because how do you say, like,
I would say though that nearly everyone who's got strong FI will have a strong 4. It just goes together. It sort of has to go together. Like
Right.
it's like with it has to, because of, like I said, you've got subjective feeling, and you know, then the 4, and like and even with my I try to break it down with the subfunction system. Like identity is a part of that FI, and it's just like ESTPs and ENTPs can't characterize. They can't do characterization because they're crap at that part of FI. It's like Douglas Adams. I'm not interested in characters. I'm interested in ideas. You're an ENTP, right? So, but that boiling it down. So
Okay,
so if we're capturing you, so if you were to write in your banner, it would be something like, so it sort of comes down to something like this then. E58338 wing 4, and you're probably thinking, Ben, I think I've got more than that 4 wing. I think the 4 should be in there. And also, what I would say is I would be tempted to replace the 3 with the 4 because
I feel the same.
Because the 3, Jonathan's talked about the 3 being out of touch with its feelings. And also, I get
but there's this element of the 3 that's, and again, everyone's definition of every type is different.
It's very STJ. The E3
well, it's very like
STJ.
I'm so willing
to and shallow.
Yes, right. But people on the Enneagram sub take one look at me and my photos, and they're like, "Oh, E3, obsessed with what she looks like, obsessed with success, obsessed." And I'm just like, "They're like, don't you want to try to delve this out further?" But I do relate to the E3 profile substantially, apart from where it's like success and like you want to look successful in because I want to be successful for what I want, not for what everybody else values. I could give a crap about what everybody else finds successful.
Right. This is where the FE polar comes in, the FE vulnerable. Like it's successful in your own eyes. You don't care what other people think. It's successful for you.
Right. And so this is another problem, and I'm still hashing this out with the tri-type. So it's like, where am I placing these fixes? Like, for example, would I want to lose myself and my sense of identity to become more successful? So would I put the 4 up on a higher pedestal? And yes, I would. I would not want to sacrifice my identity for the sake of success. And then But my question is, what do we ask ourselves when trying to figure out what has a heavier fix? Like, is there an extreme scenario I can be like, what would I rather choose? Would I rather choose more success, or would I rather choose to stay true to myself?
Right. So there's a correlate to this in NLP, which is like listing your values and trying to find the hierarchy of values. So it's like you can convert this into values. So you can say the value is identity, being true to yourself, being different, being unique. The value is being successful and achievement. And it's like, and so there's a thing in NLP where they said, was it in this book? Yeah, I had a look at this book yesterday. Maybe this might help. You'll be able to extract the lesson from this example, because it doesn't quite, the example they give won't suit your circumstances, but the principle you'll be able to extract from it. We can use criteria to explore an issue like commitment to a job or group. So Hailey, if you change the format, you can show us in more of a close-up. There should be an option where it's a bit more, maybe to the one of those squares at the bottom. There's one that sort of like makes it where it's, that's it. So hierarchy criteria, and I believe in my camera will focus in a moment. If I just So
Yes. 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 Okay. To readily find the value or criterion that would can kind of read it, motivate you to go. Do not jump to life or death. I can't life or death. Something at the start. Think of something that would be enough to tip the scales. Next, ask what would have to be true to stay on, even if something
one.
happened.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'll
Yes.
read it
Okay.
out. I'll read it as well. Suppose you've committed
Yeah, that
yourself
was
to a group. What would have to be true for you to leave? Find the value or criterion that would motivate you to go. Do not jump to life or death issues at the start. Think of something that would be just enough to tip the scales. Next, ask what would have to be true to stay on, even if one happened. Find the criterion that would override what you discovered at once. So that would be a more important criterion. Then ask what would have to be true for you to leave, given 1 and 2 have happened. So that's the third one that overrides the previous. It's like Asimov's laws of robotics. Find a more important criterion until you can go no further, so nothing would induce you to stay on, even if your last criterion happened. You are sure to find some interesting ideas en route from 1 to n. So
that's
you
interesting.
can. So it's like trying to find like a criteria ladder. So what I've noticed with you is there's examples where you have talked about. I like the close-up version.
I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Where so for example, you've talked about not wanting to advertise powders. So if you were a core 3, you would have done a load of stuff in terms of advertising a lot of crap that doesn't work. Whereas you want to be authentic, you want to tell the truth.
But see, these are. I mean, this question right here, someone would be like, "Hey, let's try to flesh out what a 3 would do. Like, Hailey, tell me about yourself." Like, and so when I would relay this to someone, they would be like, "Wow, well, I mean, an E3 would have jumped at the chance, and you didn't." But yeah, so that's very helpful. But I guess I'm not really wanting to look at the core because I feel like I'm very solid in what my core is, but it's like the fixations. Yes, it's hard because I very much relate to the 3.
There might be something else that overlaps with the 3. Where is self-preservation in your stacking?
Yeah, so this is something else that came up on the Enneagram Reddit sub that it seems like everybody has a different definition for what SP and SX like. So if you want to just kind of give me your understanding of the SP and the SX.
Right, okay. So SX really is intimacy. And it's about psychological intimacy. It's not really about sex drive. It's about
of course.
that strong bond. The self-preservation stuff is, as Jonathan would say, it's like career, job, how you're physically doing with your survival needs. But the problem is that depending on someone's circumstances, that can be more important. You could have someone who's SP last, but their circumstances might scream at them, SP, self-preservation, self-preservation. It's like with Jeff. Jeff is probably not SP first, but when he was caring for his son, he was thinking about those needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, or someone like, I mean, you're always like, say someone's like relatively well off, well, they're not going to be thinking about self-pres needs at that point. They're going to be working on something else. Something else will be their focus of attention. It's like that that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I once joked that it's like Maslow's hierarchy of NF needs. And it's like maybe you could do a different hierarchy for each temperament.
Yeah.
So
that's difficult for me though, because I mean, growing up, I always had a fixation on this personal relationship with finding a mate. I mean, I guess this could be with a friend or someone, but I had this fixation my entire life on wanting to find my romantic person, partner. But at the same time, it's very odd because my core fear is being incompetent. But I'm like, I took this further. Like, what does that mean? It's like, I need to feel able and competent. And this means I need to have enough resources. I need to have enough time. I want to like make sure I have everything that I need. I'm low energy. I want my own time, my own space. I have my own resources, stockpile of food. Like, this is a must for me. But I'm like, I don't feel like I'm SP primary.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, and also there's a lot of overlap between SX and E4. So
then I'm like, how do we know which?
This is where it's. This is where you really gotta you gotta do all the factors and like maybe even Venn diagram it as like to really think about consistencies. So it's like I would think that the way the 3 is understood as this person, it's almost like, okay, the 3 was criticized in the United States in the 1970s as part of this thing called the redemption plot, where you would have somebody where it was, and it would get a lot of Oscars, this plot. This is the plot where, and it's a good plot. And what it would do is it would sort of turn previous stories on its head. Where in most stories, it's like the hero gets what he wants, or the heroine gets what she wants. And it's like, that's when they win. What happened in the redemption plot is that the pursuit of the goal corrupted the person. And as they got towards the goal, they realized that the goal was not worth it and it was corrupting it, and they gave up the goal, and so they won by losing. So it was an ironic story pattern, and very, very much important in the 1970s, and it reflected American values of that a lot of people were feeling that they were working hard to fulfill that American dream. And you're going to get this with a lot of, because we follow economics, we know this when stuff's bad. There's going to be a lot of people out there, are going to be a lot of guardians of, look, I do everything right, I try hard, you know what I mean? Like they really slug their guts out to achieve, but the environment is not allowing them to achieve. And it's like somebody else might look at this person and it's like, look, you're slugging your guts out, your marriage has gone to hell because you're working so hard, you're pushing, like you're just working yourself. And it's like, in order to achieve this thing, and it's like that work-life balance thing, and there's too much put on that search for, and it's usually material success. And like the NFs naturally are not 3. They're against, because it's like they see this person as materialistic and not. You can get some 3 in an NF, like sometimes with ENFJ, you can get that 2-wing 3. You got to watch out for the 3 for them is like their own personal influence on others. But the NF doesn't want that material success as much. The spiritual needs are important for them. And so for you, it's what are the consequences of the 3? This is something we're going to have to ask Jonathan, like if someone's a 5 with a 3 in the trifix, are they more likely to be 5-wing 6? And if they're 5-wing 4, because you see what I mean? Because if someone's already 5-wing 4, then you've already acknowledged that the 4 is important. And so if the 4 is important, then the 3 would have to be really important to like knock it out of that slot.
Right.
Because that's a strong contender for your heart fix.
Right. I mean, I look at my day to day, and of course, I'm comfortable now. So, of course, I can spend my life doing what I was working on my goals, and that's what everybody sees me working to succeed. You know, like do. But then I'm like looking at the extremes and the 3 versus the 4. Like, would I be comfortable giving up my identity and uniqueness to further pursue what I'm pursuing now? And the answer is a hard no, like a hard no. Even though people wouldn't know that unless they asked me that. I mean, yes, I am very much like achieve, do it. Like, well, while I am doing, I have energy, that is, but yeah, I mean, I feel like people wouldn't know that unless they asked me. But then I'm going now to the 8, right? And I've been thinking more about the 8 and this idea of, because my core fear is being incompetent and like wanting to be able, and all the resources go along with that. But a very close core fear, probably my second, is being controlled. I do not want to be controlled. And I've had a problem with this my entire life, where even when somebody tells me to do something out of love, out of what's best for me, like, you need to do this, I instinctively like, go F yourself. I will not, like, you cannot tell me what to do. But at the same time, I look at some past things that have happened in my life with some abuse and people who have put me in this like these situations where I felt like maybe it's just unhealthy in me that I haven't yet like healed from, but maybe that, like, my life experiences have pushed me towards wanting to like be like anal retentive about controlling everything. I want to control what I wear, what I look like, everything I do. So like I've really been trying to delve deep into like why I do what I do, and like I don't know. There's so many things, Ben.
One of the things, I know I'm being a bit interrupted, but something just came to me. There's something that Tom Condon said that, like, see, here's the thing: 583 would be incompatible with your level of feeling, because that trifix, it's like that is the one, because those 3 are very much out of touch with their feelings. The 3 is out of touch with its feelings. The 5 is out of touch with its feelings. The 8 is out of touch with its feelings. But if we say 584 for you, and it's like if we say 584 wing 4, there's enough 4 in there to match the level of FI that you show. Because I just think that the 583, like, if you look it up, the 358 is out of touch with its feelings.
Yeah, and I relate to the write-up description of the 583, but in the instances where I need to solve problems, like, I would consider myself a very competent individual, like, solving shit. Like, when something goes wrong, you fucking see me work. Like, I get that shit hashed out. But it's the 583, the profile is missing this element of a side of my personality, like the 4-ness, that individualness, that brooding that I have, that like these elements that aren't there in the 583 profile. So I think that's really interesting, and I have to agree with you.
Also, there's differences where, like, Dario, I mean, like, you've probably seen it from YouTube, like, the INTJ females are more in touch with their feelings than the INTJ males. And Dario's research, I mean, when he did, I know this is 2005, I think you'd like his newer book, because it's like there's a lot of data on it. So that's the Magic Diamond one. I recommend that book. So this is from his study, though, where, right, so some gender differences. I can put that on screen. Dario shouldn't kill me for that. Only if I, here we go. I suggest you do the,
Oh shit, sorry.
So maybe you were better off before. There we go. Maybe you were better off.
Actually,
yeah, you were probably better off before.
I think it was better. Yeah, that was better. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I see this in my husband and I.
Right, yeah, you got a good comparison there. Both the same type.
Yeah. He can be very, very cold, and I can take cold and blunt. And sometimes I'm just like, hey, you need to take a chill pill. Like, yeah. So it's hard for me to read the color bits, like when the pink highlighter starts.
as a whole, women rated extroverted feeling more highly than men did. Even women who rated thinking items higher than feeling items overall. Similarly, as a whole, men rated introverted thinking items more highly than women did. Even men who rated feeling items higher than thinking items overall. This difference was statistically significant. A weaker pattern, non-significant, was observed for introverted feeling for men and extroverted thinking. So introverted feeling for women and extroverted thinking for men. And then gender links and lifelong development. Women in the 30s and 40s reported. Now, your development might be accelerated because of your typology knowledge. Extensive basic use of all processes, but less advanced use of their preferred process. This result fits the research of gender and cognition that suggests that women have more interconnectivity between various areas of the brain, while men tend to have more compartmentalization between areas and more focused specialization. But again, there's tendencies.
You came back.
Yeah,
This is definitely something.
So, and also
I've
instinct.
seen.
You know, I keep calling sensing instinct, and it's like, well, we know that. So, for example, you know from biology, you know a lot from biology in terms of the role of testosterone and also the qualities, psychological qualities associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
And also what happens when people take roids and how it affects their mood. So you know that testosterone is a factor in terms of how it alters someone's psychology. So, and it gets bound up with SE. And like, because the statistics are bold. Prison population, there's like 10 times more male prisoners than female prisoners. Especially, and if you look at violent crime, there's way more males than females in violent crime. Right? And they're women are from poor backgrounds too. So there's something there in like with the testosterone. And so the reason I bring this up is that by reframing sensing as instinctive, and it's like, especially with assertive SE, like how far does that assertive SE go with the, especially in like fighting and aggression, that kind of thing, and there's, to a lesser degree in women. It's just a less. How does that come out? How does that affect things? It's like, what are the percentages? And then there's gender role socialization. Like, it's interesting. Linda Bowen said that it was the hardest woman to. She was biased though because she sees herself as INTP, and I see her as INTP as well. She said it was the hardest type for a woman to be was INTP, and then I thought, well, surely it's ENTJ because they're furthest away from the ISFJ stereotype. And I thought, hang on a minute, but the ENTJs are the ENTJ. They're in charge. They don't, you know what I mean? Like, their natural personality is combative, but when you're an INTP, you're not naturally combative. So maybe she's right. Maybe the INTP female has the hardest time because the INTP female is naturally accommodating and different from ISFJ, whereas ENTJ is further away from ISFJ, but they're not naturally accommodating. So you can have like the ENTJ female like Margaret Thatcher, Carly Fiorina. I think that ENTJ. I think Margaret Thatcher, like research chemist in the 1950s. I think most people are pretty clear Margaret Thatcher ENTJ, and Carly Fiorina. You know, recently she ran for the election in like 2016. If you look at Carly Fiorina, I think she was like former CEO of Hewlett Packard. I think she's ENTJ. I think they access more. But like I said, the 358. I can't remember. It's like the way, like the 3. Like if you look at that heart center, it's like 3 in the heart center. Really, like no, really, it's the image center. It's the image center, but like. The 3 is about material success. But here's the problem, though. Is it? Or is it because all these TJs that are being typed as 3, and then all the Enneagram people are looking at all these STJ 3s, all these Guardians 3s, and then writing their profiles based on all these ESTJ 3s. And also the Keirsey ENTJ is very 3-ish. In Please Understand Me Too. The Keirsey ENTJ. And so when Keirsey writes about, so there's certain of those features when Keirsey writes about the rationals that are going to lean more NTJ and some are going to lean more NTP. So when he writes about the factorial speech, that's more like the type that's going to do that most is INTP. Like it's made, this factor, that factor, that factor, that factor, all these factors that bear on an issue. And then when he writes about the striving for achievement, well, that's going to be more the NTJs, especially ENTJ. And
so this whole thing about the NTs striving for achievement, I mean, I very much relate to that people just they look at me and see that I have goals and want to achieve things, and they're just like, oh, E3. And I do relate to that of the 3, but the materialistic side of the 3, the 3s basically shitting on their own values and everyone else to attain success. I don't relate to that. So, I mean, would you say, like, okay, this whole idea of everybody being able to fixate on...
I just think it's incompatible with the 4. I just think it's incompatible with the 4, where it's like, if your try-fix was...
So where does this come from?
Yeah, that's what I'm sort of saying. That's what I'm saying. We've got to get rid of the incompatibility. Try to get something that doesn't contradict itself. So what I'm saying is, it would be a bit of a contradiction if you were like 583, and then you were to say wing 4. Because it's like, because what you're saying is, it's like, well, when I look at my image center, I choose the 3, but then I choose the 4 instead of the 6, but we know it's a heavy 4 with you. Would you think that's fair to say that your 4 is a heavy 4? It's a heavy 4 wing.
Yes.
Right. And given that you, and so if you've got a heavy 4 wing, your 3 would have to be heavier than that in order for you to pick the 3 over the 4 in your heart fix. And it's not. So therefore, by default, and then it's like, then we've got a compatibility where it's like 584 wing 4, and it's like, and then we can say, okay, that sort of lines up there. We've not got that incompatibility, and it lines up with your degree of FI, and it lines up with the fact that you're not always talking about yourself and do that 3 fix that annoys me in people.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that either.
There are any 3s on the channel. They are annoying.
That's funny. So my question is, like, okay, you can have your tri-type, like you have your core, like your 3 core fixations, but this whole achievements, and I have my goals, of course. This is like, would you say that I have my 584, but I can fixate on the 3 in the instances where I'm working on the doing, the achieving? Or would we sum this up as like, oh, well, it's more of the it's NT, like, because the NT is going to be fixated on achieving, very much relate to that. But
yeah, well, let's have a look what Keirsey wrote about the achievement in NTs, because he does put some good nuances in there. Right, okay, so what we got? Right, so this is, values, achievements. So it's like, it depends how it comes, like, so for instance, this is just an achievement in a little way. So I want people to like my model Vaseline. So it's like, I want people to, like, so it's like, hey, it's an 8 function model that I think people can understand, and I think it has some utility to it. And so it's like, or if I get the sitcom done and it's there and people like it, I have a real sense of achievement. So it's like, but a lot of people, it's that, but it also might be me with the 6 connection to 3. But again, let's go back to trust in reason. Yeah, yearning for achievement. So this is Keirsey on page. Right. One of the most important things to remember about rationals, if they are to be understood, is that they yearn for achievement. So, like I said, there are INTPs that like get their theories out there, but for the INTP, it's like getting a theory out there. But for the NTJs, it's more like concrete. Suppose that they seemingly calm and contemplative types have no strong desires, but beneath the calm exterior is a gnawing hunger to achieve whatever goals they set for themselves. While NTs prefer to acquire know-how and would like to be ingenious, they must achieve, and their longing is never fully satisfied. Because their hunger for achievement presses them constantly, rationals live through their work. For them, work is work and play is work. Condemning an NT to idleness with the worst sort of punishment. However, rationals work not so much for the pleasure of action like artisans, nor for the security a job provides like guardians, or for the joy of helping others like idealists. Rationals work with a single-minded desire to achieve their objectives. Indeed, once involved in a project, they tend to be reluctant, if not unable, to limit their commitment of time and energy. Unfortunately, at this point, they can be reasonably... Now, I think Keirsey himself probably was a 5'8" something. He might have been a 5'8" but again, he was like, I don't know, because like all this psychology stuff, I think 5 and 8 were in there. But again, he grew up, again, non-type factor, he grew up in the Great Depression. He was in World War II. Like, so, like, he's got a lot more SE than his son. His son is very conflict avoidant. And we did his tri-type. He's got a 9 in it. David Mark Keirsey has a 9 in his tri-type. I think Senior might have had an 8. Unfortunately, at this point, they can be reasonably... time and energy. Unfortunately, at this point, they can be unreasonably demanding of both themselves and others, setting their standards too high and becoming quite tense under stress. So did you say to your husband, do you say to each other, leave me alone, no, you leave me alone. I've got to get this project to get on.
No, we don't. It's great. We are so in sync.
Yeah.
I mean, well, during the day, we'll each just pop our head up like, hi, I love you. And then boom, back down working. It's perfect because I don't have someone up my ass all the time and he doesn't have someone up his ass all the time. We're just doing our thing together. Right. Like we're alone together. It's great.
Right. So to speak. Right.
Yeah, but like my question at its core is like, you can have someone wanting to achieve, obviously the NT, who doesn't have an E in their tri-type. Just because they don't have an E in their tri-type doesn't mean they don't want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on, like, I mean, in my own case, I've got, like, ADHD, but I've become more self-disciplined. But you can have, like, an ENTP, but I will say that the Keirsey profiles lean towards the, how can I put this? Like, the genius versions of the NTs. And it's like, in his artisan profiles lean towards, like, the genius, like, you know, like, the artisans with skills. But that's because Keirsey was surrounded by a lot of like high quality NTs himself, and he read a lot of philosophy, and I would say that he was a high quality NT himself, like not just smart for but smart for his type, like a high achieving version of his own type, but again also given his own specific backstory. And he was a libertarian himself, so he's got like a bit of 3 in there. And like I said, grew up in the Great Depression, was a fighter pilot in World War II. That's unusual for INTP.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So like I said, that will amp up his SE. Mm-hmm. And after World War II, he worked with juvenile delinquents. So he gets his psychology degree, and he works as a counselor. And he's counseling these STPs, and 95% of them STPs, these juvenile delinquents, and it's like STP boys, and he's got all these decades of working with unruly school boys, and it's like, so his level of oomph is going to be a lot more than your average INTP that's not going up against that. And then, so like an INTP 9 wouldn't be very difficult for them to be as like as much oomph. But anyway, why did I mention Keirsey?
Why did you mention? Pardon me?
Oh yeah. It was it about? I'm wondering why I mentioned him. It's like because it is an example of non-type factors. Like I said, yeah. So like, if you have an INTP that becomes like a psychologist or a counselor, their brain's going to change, and it'll look a bit more like an NF. There'll be areas like the area of the brain about listening and paying attention to tone of voice, that kind of stuff, versus the INTP that like does something more logical. Well, they'll build on their strengths. So yeah, I think that the level of strength of your FI would be inconsistent with 583 because that type because it's so cut off from it because it's so cut off from its feelings, because like the 8 is cut off from its feelings, the 5 is, and the whereas with the heavy 4 it makes sense that it would be
my
there.
question,
And the 3 stuff could be coming from self-preservation and just TJ stuff. NTJ stuff.
Right.
It's where you put it in your hierarchy. Like, it's like, okay, this is important, but this is more important. And then, like, as that example showed in that book, try and work out your hierarchy ladder.
That was a great example, and I'll have to do that. Now, my last question, because I know we're nearing 2 hours here. My last question. Sorry to ask you another question about myself, but I'm just curious. So
no, it's good. We've got to keep it relevant.
Yeah. So in terms of the tri-type, then I came to ask myself, well, the 4 is so strong, why wouldn't it be trying to look at the extremes, right? Would I rather be controlled, or would I rather like what would I rather have? Like what would I trying to look at the extremes. And I think I would rather lose part of my identity than to be controlled. Right. And I was trying to put myself in situations.
Right, so that's consistent with putting the 8 above the 4. Yeah, the 8 above the 4.
But my question is this the right question to ask when trying to figure out
that's
what
fine.
order should like?
Well, I mean, that would work. That goes with the values in NLP with that example that they gave. Like, and this is what it boils down to: is that these enneagrams are mapping values. So it's like we can tag what you said there about your identity in that. Like, we map that, we tag that as 4, but that is a value that's outside of Enneagram. People talk about that. Like it's something that exists as like an abstract noun, but it exists. It's psychological reality that people do care about their integrity and their sense of like who they are in that. And Enneagram is just a way to map that. And that part of NLP, because some bits of NLP don't work, but that part of NLP about values and like trying to get them in a ladder of like get it in that hierarchy where it's like, yeah, in that situation, your 8 is more important than your 4 in that extreme case. But then also we need to think about, well, we're making some assumptions there that because we generalize them, because I've learned from NLP and I've learned from Jeff and artisans that if we did like a timeline of Hailey through say a month, and we would rank these sort of like the Enneagram numbers, and it's like in each specific situation, and it's like the 8 is more important than the 4. The 8 is more important than the 4. But it's like, it depends on the situation. Like you were thinking of a really extreme situation when you would say the 8 is more important than the 4. But then there's going to be less extreme situations where it's like, well, the 4 might be more important here because it might be, well, a little bit less control is sacrificed, and it might be a little bit more identity that's important. It then depends on degree. So it was like something that I said in a recent video where Vanderhoop did a section of introversion. So this is introversion. And it's like when you're extroverted, it gets smaller and larger. So it's like it's dynamic. So it might be that, and this is why NLP, because NLP was created by STPs. They make a distinction between values and criteria. And they say that criteria are sort of more situation specific. So depending on the situation, and I think Catherine Farber's talks about this as well, that it can sort of go through a rotation of, it's like, so it might be like 5, 8, 4 is what your trifix is on average, but certain situations might pull out certain values more than others, because these are values. It's like, you know, we can relate these Enneagram numbers to values. What you value, like, oh, I value my independence and my knowledge, and I value being authentic and true to myself. And it's like, how do those, because then, so for instance, when I'm writing the character of Laura, you then try and put your character in that situation to make them choose between those values, and then the audience can see what's more important. But again, in real life, it's like well, it's like, so for example, someone might say that money is more important than their integrity, right? And it's like, and in one action, they might turn the money down, you know, and it's like, oh, I mean, integrity. And then it's like, and then the next time they take the money because it's way more. It's not stupid. I took the money because it was like 10 times as much as it was before. So, you know what I mean? Someone's taking a different
well,
action,
but
the
stupid.
yeah, but you know what I mean? Like if it becomes silly money, well,
Yes.
I'm stupid to turn it down. But then they might have done something like this, where it becomes like, oh, I took the money, but then gave it to charity. or then took the money and then campaigned against them, and I paid for an advert to call them out, or something like that. So there's lots of little things that can happen with, and so, oh yeah, that's something I wanted to get onto as a principle that I picked up from Robert McKee, but also you might want to take this principle on board, because it's a principle with human beings, and it somewhat contradicts typology, but I think it's true. And that is the idea that human beings have contradictions. And I did it across 4 levels. So I took his idea, but I elaborated it, where you've got contradictions within social and story roles. It's like I said before, like say you've got an INTP who's a mother, and it's like they're not really suited to that role, but like it's and then roles versus characterization, and then true character is what the person actually does, like their actual decisions. So for instance, someone could actually be nice and all generous, but their actual actions might betray that they're a selfish person who's only out for themselves. And then you've got the unconscious, what the person is unconscious of about itself. And it's like you can have a situation where, like I said, in one situation, and also what you can do is this context. You could design a story where someone takes an action and the audience, so someone comes in and beats someone up, and the audience says, oh, what a terrible person. And you've judged the character by their action. And it's like, oh, look how vicious that person was. And then it goes through the story, then it revisits that scene, and then it shows all the build-up and recontextualizes the scene. And then you've watched the same action and you've come to a different conclusion about someone's character because it's recontextualized. So...
Yeah, this whole thing about contradictions of people. I mean, I find this apparent in myself in so many situations. Like part of the 8 that I really relate to is this like hero complex. And I will sit and daydream about this. And I have this protector instinct in myself. But at the same time, like I want to, like I try to dig deep on this. Like, what do I really want to help people do? And I want to help them help themselves. Like I want to, and this is really bad from a business standpoint, right? Because like back when I would train, I would tell my clients like, hey, I want it to end up where you will not need me. You will know what to do. You will like learn what to do on your own. Like this isn't going to be
right. All these self-coaches that want to keep people, want to keep getting the fee.
Right. But at the same time, while I have this like protector, like I have times where I will just sit and daydream and put myself in this role, and I really enjoy that. And even in instances in my life, like where I have actually stood up for somebody who was being bullied, like that is a huge trigger for me, being bullied. But I find myself getting really bitter and angry with people who won't help themselves. So it's like this fine line between, this person needs help, I want to stand in and like help protect them and help them, and then on the flip side, I'm like, these incompetent, just lazy people, like I have trouble with this so much. I have trouble with this. And I find like it's such a huge contradiction, because it's like, Hailey, well, you say you want to help people, you want to, help lift them up, help them want to help themselves, and help them want to learn for themselves, but at the same time you get like, I don't know, I guess I just expect people to want to have the drive.
That makes sense though. That makes sense. That is how it plays out in human nature, because there's like a couple of values, and again, it depends on the situation. Like, so for example, in this situation, this person needs help through no fault of their own. They need help, and it's a little bit like, so yeah, there's that connection there between 8 and 2, which is a little bit like, it might be an example of how you access FE, in that I've come to think about that function. This depends on if you want to put it on, if you want to put it, everything to do, if you want to help somebody, automatically has to be FE. Well, it could be FI. It could be just be the way you're wired. So it's like, it could be just part of your FI. It's coming from, but it's, again, as you said, the 8 and a 2, that does sound like that 8-2 dynamic. But there's a line from Amos Burton in The Expanse, and I think is ESFJ. And he said this line, the three, and he's like a criminal, again, criminal background. He says, there are 3 kinds of people in this world. Bad ones, those you protect, and those you follow. And so for him, it's like, he makes these judgment calls about people. So it's like, oh, this bad person, I'm going to beat him up. I've got to eliminate, got to kill that person. I've got to help that person. Got to follow that person. And I thought that is such an ESFJ male point of view. But what I'm sort of getting towards there is like, you're right though, and a lot of people will feel that, and it's knowing that it's that thing of helping somebody in the right situation, when this person needs help, and where they don't get a sort of reliance on that help, and you being the judge of that. That's just also, it's like, what is best for that person. And also the NFJs can get like that as well. They are directive. Like when they're counseling someone, they will know if someone, because they've got that, they value that SE, where it's like, they can say, they can push the person to take this action. They'll know when the person needs help versus when the person is becoming dependent on them. And so maybe they'll say that like, there's a maximum number of but yeah, but what you said is an example of humanity, and is, on its surface, it seems contradictory, but it's what it is. It's a balance of different values, and usually that what happens is the output seems contradictory, but it's because you've got a balance of values.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. It seems like I take it to an extreme though. Like an example being a girl who is lamenting to me just how terrible she feels she looks, and she's getting bullied over it, or maybe I'm seeing her getting bullied over something about how she looks, and it hurts me deeply to see that, and I want to step in and like protect her, but at the same time I find myself getting bitter. Like bitter is, I think, is the right word. It's not really mad, it's just like very severely annoyed that these people aren't taking steps. Like, for example, in many of the cases, what she's getting bullied over, she could make a large attempt to better that thing. And like, clearly she's being affected by it. So I'm like, yeah, but this is the extreme I'm taking it to. Like, why hasn't she tried to do something for herself?
Well,
and it makes me bitter.
Yeah, it's looking at it as like the person has not got the TE approach and clarity that you have to the situation. And also, some people like to, like, in certain situations, if it's a 4,
this has been my problem.
The 4 can get addicted to therapy. The 4, if they're a 4, say there's a problem related to them, they want to be in, because it's like they're special because then they're in therapy and they need help. And it's like, but what you're saying is you've got a very TE approach of this is what you do. And also there's the resources that somebody has, and you're right, but you have the ability, with the way you are set up, you are set up so that you can see the steps, and you have a feeling that if I follow these steps towards that goal. These other people, it's like
it's not intuitive to them to do that. Yeah, I understand. And this has been something
the future is not real to them. It's like they can't think ahead in this long-term planning, and unless they get immediate results.
It's helped me to reflect on that, because it's true though. I mean, there are many people who aren't predisposed to just forward thinking and being like, what steps might I take to better this? And so I have to remove myself from this bitterness, from this like getting upset and annoyed at their lack of competence and their lack of whatever you call that, and be like, hey, the fact that I exist, my opposite exists, and like it's humbling to me. Because like I feel like I have to self-reflect on that and like not get as bitter towards people because they're not like I am. So
yeah, that's how typology. And I just like that phrase that was on a Behrens book, understanding yourself and others. That's the main utility of typology. And also imagine like someone would like from an FE point of view. What an ESFJ might say about INTJ is, they might say, and again, it's like what the person can't see. And it's like they might say, this INTJ is spoiling themselves by their attitude. And it's like, but it's like, and you'd be like, I'm happy with my lot. I don't need this. It's like, it comes down to values and criteria. And really, and like I said, I mean, like an INTJ, let's say you'd grown up in Italy, some more FE would have rubbed off on you. You're doing a bit more, there might be a little bit more FE rub off, and there was like, or maybe fake, you'd be able to fake FE. Maybe you'd like have learned to fake FE a bit, but if your parents were like FEing you all the while, like, hey, you should do this and all this. It's very FE culture, Italy.
I'm not even sure that I'm good at it. I do know that it drains me, and I avoid it at all costs. And this is why I think I don't have many female friends.
I remembered something. There was an INTJ female from the South. I know you're from the South as well, but she's like extra Southern. And like she was saying that she could keep it up for like half an hour, like this like act of like, because she her parents were rich, and she was like taught of like how to like talk to like, and she'd keep it up for like half an hour to do this like Southern Belle kind of thing. And it was just like, then that's it. She's completely exhausted.
Yeah. However, this whole like I don't know if you would call this FE, but it's something that was never really apparent to me. I didn't look for it, but in my pictures, like smiling in my pictures, I never cared about. And I still don't care about it. I just do it because I understand that people like that in the photo, and I think it's, as Dario would say, good for business.
Yeah.
So yes,
And also,
I don't know if that counts, but
no expression is better than a fake smile, though.
right, yeah, I agree. But people
Yeah,
often are like,
but
oh,
yeah,
you're
a
mad, you're upset
genuine,
about something. Why don't you
yeah,
smile?
yeah. I got that though. But INTPs can be like that. Like when younger INTPs can be like not have much FE. Because again, that inferior function. But it also depends on what like. If I'm in an event where I'm not enjoying it, like it's like no. I mean, I'll have to change my inner state.
I don't think I've ever seen you lose composure like that.
One
I mean, you
was
always seem
I did.
very.
Yeah, I did a bit of well, like I did one thing was when I did the debate against Jack, I what I showed was different from how I felt on the inside.
Okay. See, I would have so much trouble with that.
But
I
I
would have
think
so much
though,
trouble
if
with
I
that.
was closer to the camera, it would have been shown.
Okay.
Right, but I just had a lot of preparation for that debate, and now when we did, I will say that when we did the previous debate, because it was a mess up with the recording, it didn't get recording. I didn't do as well in the previous debate because I was expecting a discussion, and so in that I was a little bit more flustered in that one. It was just that when they did it the second time, it was like 2 weeks later, and I had more preparation and I knew what his arguments were. Then I was more
Right.
more composed. So yeah.
You know, even if I think I'm good at the whole like putting on a face, like pretending like I'm not pissed off, I don't know if I'm good at it or not, but in the moment, I find myself like, oh, I should probably try to put a face on, but then I'm like, no, like fuck, like F it, like
Yeah.
no, like I'm just gonna be me. Like if you don't like it.
Yeah.
So I guess I just haven't yet got to the point where I want to get better at it, but also with being home all the time, working, you
So
know, I
maybe to drill down on this is like, so when it is achievement, it's achievement for yourself
right.
in the eyes of yourself and your husband is probably whereas the 3, it's achievement from the point of view of like status symbols.
Yeah, no, I don't
All
care
of that.
about that.
Yeah,
Obviously,
you don't care. Like I mean, when you used to dress, like you'd go to like you'd say you parsimonious, like you go for that $3
yeah,
t-shirt.
it's
Yeah,
true. Like this shirt was like $5.
right.
It's great. Like, I mean, yeah. So this aspect of the 3, like, okay, the only thing of the 3 I relate to in the 3 profile is the achievements and success, but success is I define it.
Right.
I don't find myself materialistic. I'm parsimonious, like you said. That's always been something at my core, like hard. I am proud to be parsimonious. So
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that the yeah, because I can see that NTJs are all going to be towards achievement, and even the achievement for the INTP is going to be a little bit like different. It's going to be more abstract, but yeah, it's going to be abstract.
okay, well, any parting words? Because this is getting long.
I've already had a lot of NE words. NE parting words. Sausage. There you go. That's an NE parting word.
Well,
I know what you mean. This. NE part. So yeah, I think your trifix is 584.
I have more questions, but let's keep this for the next one. Let's keep this for the next one.
There will be a next one, folks.
Yes. And the next, okay, okay. The topic of the next one I would like to get into is, we're probably going to reiterate a lot of what we said here, but that's fine. But it's going to be this idea of, and this was brought to my attention by the Enneagram Reddit sub, and many of those people are incompetent, so I don't know how much weight I should give to this, but when somebody says, I'm a 5'8" or a 5'8", it's like a blatant red flag of mistype. You've mistyped. So that would be what I want to focus on next time is, and like, I'm sorry to keep wanting to talk about myself. I really want to understand, like why, like, am I mistyping? Is this really like?
No, that's them. They don't know about it. It's these people. They just want to. It's not like Jonathan. Like, he knew a hell of. You did videos with Jonathan before he did all of the lessons from Catherine Farber. She's only like certified like 20 people in about 30 years, and Jonathan's one of them. And so like he took lessons from her like. He'd probably like in classes like 2 or 3 times a week, and he's been doing that for 4 years. So he knows a heck of a lot about Enneagram, and so maybe in future we could bring in Jonathan on the we could do maybe a bit more on Trifix, but the way I see it, with just the balance of things. So in summary, like, you've got a heavy 4, and if you had the 3 over the 4, it would have to be really heavy, and then it's sort of incompatible with the FI. Right. So it's just, in terms of what gels together, I can see the 5, 8, 4 making sense. I just think you want, the achievement that you want is proportionate to what an NTJ wants. It's not extra. It's not. Now, your husband might be a bit more 3-ish. Do you think he's more 3-ish?
513.
Right. And so you can compare to him in that level of, and so when you see him,
right,
wow, look, 3, that's the 3. Because that would be a good comparison, because you know him well and he's the same type.
Repeat that last sentence, please.
Because you know him well and he's the same type, INTJ, you can compare that 3 and 4 between yourselves.
I'm sorry, you are cutting out bad, and
I was just saying
meant
you
to be
can
because we need to end this. Why don't we pick this up next time?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely, and yeah, I'm gonna write this down, and we'll pick it up next time. How about that?
Right.
Sound good?
Yes.
I think maybe you're not hearing me. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ben. Oh, you can hear me? Okay. Maybe there's a lag. Sorry.
It's just a bit.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I'll see you next time.